Hi friends! I have finished my Dark Fairy costume that I will be entering into the Foundations Revealed competition this year. So I finally have time to edit all the footage that I have of the making process and make them into videos. I will be splitting the making process up into smaller but related videos, just so that each one isn't a billion years long. If you want to know more about the design process for this costume, you can check out my last video where I talk about the design choices I made and why I made them. Today I will be talking about how I made the base layer of this costume, and that consists of a shift and 2 petticoats. Starting with the shift, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the construction of the shift because other than making it floor length and out of cheesecloth, as far as I'm aware, the shapes are all what would have been used in a standard 18th century shift. The weird thing about the shift is that I wanted to make it out of cheesecloth, which is not a very conventional fabric for me to use, so I knew the construction had to be a little different than if I was going to use linen. I didn't even try just sewing the pieces of the cheesecloth together. Instead, I decided to try kind of a sandwiching method where I took the pieces and pressed them together and then stuffed the seam allowance between the 2 edges of bias tape. So like, here's a piece of cheesecloth, here's a piece of cheesecloth together, and then here's bias tape folded over, like double fold bias tape, and then that actually worked startlingly well right from the beginning. I thought I was gonna have to fuss around with it and maybe try a few other methods, and it worked just fine, and I didn't even try anything else. That's just what I went with. As far as the petticoats went, I started with a plain white fabric and tried to paint them, so I will also be showing you the process of painting and putting together the petticoats. So these are the materials I started off with. These are the measurements I decided to go with for the finished shift, and here is the cheesecloth all spread out to its full length. I decided to make the shift a little bigger than would actually fit Catherine because you can kind of scrunch it up to make it fit the size you need. I figured that bunching would help give it more of a rugged look. I tried to cut the pieces with the cheesecloth still folded over as much as possible just to keep it kind of even and make it easier. I decided to sew the gores first so that I could test if the kind of sandwich method would work on a smaller piece before I tried it on something more difficult like the sleeves. Then I made the sleeves and, of course, got pizza on them. Here is the finished shift. I continued putting the shapes together in the 18th century way, just sewing with my bias tape sandwich method instead of the usual way, and it actually turned out just how I was imagining it. For the neck hole, I cut out a small circle about the size of a grapefruit, and then I stretched the opening until it fit over Catherine's head. These seams are relatively sturdy, but this is still cheesecloth, so things are stretching and ripping with wear, but that is exactly what I wanted here for a rugged effect. This shift took me about 3 hours. Now onto the petticoats. I started out with these textured poly curtains, and I just wanted to see what would happen if I tried to distress them a little bit after cutting. You can see here that I tried a few different methods for painting the fabric with a sponge. I think this is the one I'm going to go with. It was a wet application where I got the sponge wet before trying to apply the paint. For my materials, I just used a plate as kind of a palette, a bowl of water, my handy dandy sponge that was kind of like a paintbrush, and a few different colors of acrylic paint, some of which I had already owned, some of which I bought specifically for this project. I should have used some sort of fabric medium, but I didn't. I figured it kind of made sense to start with the lightest color, so I just started honestly splotching it in completely random spots and hoping for the best. I kind of experimented with it as I went, but I figured out the best way to get kind of a splotchy, mossy result was to get the sponge wet, squeeze it out so it was damp but not soaking, dip that into the paint, kind of rub the paint around, and then once it was as spread as I could get it, smush more water into it from the sponge and spread it more from there. I realized if I didn't want to have to wait for each layer to dry between colors, then I needed to change, so I switched into some shorts and just went at it, and of course got paint all over my knees. I can't lie, at this point I was not feeling very enthused for the final outcome. Anyway, I just kept trucking along, added new colors, and just kept spreading and trying to mess with the technique a little to get it to look more like what I wanted. It's done! It's, okay at this point. It's looking a little camouflagey, which is not what I was going for, but I don't know. I guess we'll keep messing with it, maybe. So I took another one of the curtains and laid it on top, and I actually kind of like this effect. It is, the white is still just too bright, so I think I'm going to try and splotch this one with just the black and gray and then layer them together and see what I think about that. And then maybe layer a white one under all of it. I'm not sure yet. I'll see what effect that has, but yeah, you can, I mean, it's sheer fabric. So I think that's actually kind of cool once you make it not so blatant. We'll see. Anyway, the next day I did the exact same process to a second panel of the curtains, except I did it in just grays and blacks. Here you can see me filling out the top part of the curtains where they're hemmed, and I didn't originally do this because I wasn't sure that I would have enough paint to cover all of the fabric panels, so I just kind of skimped where I felt like I could. But I did have enough paint in the end, so I'm just going back to recover that. Overall, I was much happier with how this panel turned out in just the kind of grayscale, but it still was looking way too clean, so I just went back with some different colors of black and gray to make it even more splotchy. I also went back and did that to the first panel to try and make them look a little more suited to each other. The edges of the curtains kind of had a selvage, so I didn't need to finish the insides in any way, which was really nice. So I just sewed the panels together. When I did that, I just left a slit of about 7 inches, I think, at the top, just to keep it kind of like 18th century in construction and make it so that you could tie the front behind your back and then tie the back behind your front. I left the hems and where the curtain rod would have gone through the curtains and used those as a channel for some cording. And I used a hat pin to push the cording through because I couldn't find a safety pin, and that was a huge pain. So if you are attempting something similar, I would highly recommend using something not pokey to try and thread something through a channel, and you will be a lot happier than I was doing this. It's my understanding that usually 18th century petticoats would have been pleated, but I decided to do gathers because I think it looks a little more messy than the cleanness and sharpness of pleats, and that's what I'm going for here. So here is what we have so far of the cheesecloth shift and the mossy petticoat-ish things. This was actually my first time trying to paint fabric. I think it turned out pretty well. I actually really like the outcome and how splotchy it is. I decided not to use a fabric medium on this because the fabric itself was polyester and kind of stiff anyway, so I figured the stiff paint wouldn't make that much of a difference. And then I went over to Catherine's house and we did a bit of a fitting, and I just used her knees as kind of a guideline for where I wanted to distress the ends up to. Then when I got home, I layered everything on top of each other on my mannequin and used that top petticoat layer to kind of vaguely measure where the bottom layer petticoat and the shift should be distressed to as well. Ta-da! Here we are, hopefully creepy and to be more distressed in the future. Each large curtain panel took me about 1.5 hours to paint, so not including drying time, but including time to cut each large panel in half, sew them together, thread the waist cord, and distress the bottoms. The petticoats together took me about 4 hours to complete. Here is the finished base layer of the costume and how I created it. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in my next video about the peignets. Bye, friends!